Title: The Forgotten Botanist. The first time I stood in my childhood home, the air smelled of polished wood and regret. My father's eyes, once sharp with the kind of authority that could dismantle a man's spirit, flickered with something else, something I couldn't place. It wasn't pride, it wasn't fear. It was the quiet, gnawing humility of a man who'd spent decades believing he'd silence me for good. They'd all laughed when I quit academia. My mother's voice still carries the same bitter melody. You think you're a scientist. You're just a girl who likes plants. My uncle sneered. She's wasting her life on nonsense. Real work is in labs, not gardens. I remember the way my brother leaned against the kitchen counter, smirking. Herbal medicine. What's next? Witchcraft. I'd stood there trembling and said nothing. But that silence was a seed. It took me a decade to grow. After the council dismissed my climate research as unscientific and useless, I walked away from the lab. For years I drifted, farm worker, consultant, anything but that sterile world that had laughed at my questions. Then I found the herbal texts. Ancient, cracked, written by people who'd healed the world before we learned to ignore the earth. I combined them with my own studies, blending traditional knowledge with modern botany. My first project was a dry, forgotten valley near my hometown. No one believed I could turn it into anything but a graveyard. But I did. I planted saplings, tested soils, wove remedies from roots. I watched drought-resistant vines crawl up cracked walls and rivers of rainwater carve paths through stone. The land responded. It bloomed. When I returned, my family was in the backyard, sharing a bottle of cheap wine. My father's arm was in a sling, arthritis from years of playing golf, he claimed. "There you are," my mother said, as if I were a ghost. "You look different." I smiled. They didn't ask questions, not at first. They just stared. The way my brother did when I handed him a leaf from my garden, its edges still tender green. The way my uncle's jaw tightened when I explained that the same plants he'd mocked as quackery were now purifying the water in the village. Then my mother took my hand. Her fingers trembled. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How did you?" I didn't answer. I could feel the weight of their past words, the dismissal, the ridicule, the way they treated my work like a joke. But I didn't need to. The land spoke for me. That night I led them through the valley. The trees, once barren, now danced with fireflies. The soil, once cracked and lifeless, was thick with fungi and worms. Children from the village played where I'd once buried my dreams. I showed them the remedies, how a single flower could ease a fever, how a root could mend a wound. My father stood silent, watching me. His face was a map of years of certainty, now softened by something he couldn't name. "You've done something," he finally said. Not a compliment, a truth. I didn't argue, I just smiled. The real moment came at dawn. My brother and I stood on the edge of the valley, the sun bleeding gold over the hills. He was arguing with a farmer about the sustainability of my methods. "You're wasting resources," the man said. "Your wife's work is unscientific." I stepped forward. "Tell me," I said, voice steady, "what happens when you poison the land? When you ignore the plants that grew here long before your ancestors carved their names into the soil?" My brother stared. The man shut up. I turned to my family. "You mocked me," I said. "You called my work ridiculous, useless. But this is the truth. The land isn't a joke, it's alive." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My uncle's knuckles whitened. And then slowly they began to speak. My father admitted he doubted me. My mother confessed she'd envied my stubbornness. My brother, he just shook his head, muttering about the old fool who finally learned. We didn't cry, but the silence between us was full of understanding. Later, as the family gathered for tea, I shared the results of my work. The numbers were staggering. 40% increase in local biodiversity, 60% reduction in water scarcity, 200 families now dependent on my methods. I showed them photos of the village, of the children learning to plant, of the scientists who'd come to study me. But the real proof was in the soil. That night, I sat with my nephew, who'd grown up believing I'd thrown my life away. He asked, "How did you do it?" I smiled. By not listening to people who thought they knew better. He nodded, and for the first time I saw the seeds of curiosity in his eyes. The story of the forgotten botanist isn't just about plants. It's about the quiet, relentless power of belief. About how the mockery of others can't drown the light of a heart that refuses to extinguish. And when the family saw the valley, truly saw it, they didn't just see a scientist. They saw a miracle. And in that moment, the past's cruelty melted into the present's grace. Karma doesn't always roar. Sometimes it blooms.